Hello, good evening. Welcome to the latest episode for our series on the most popular apps in China. And in this episode, we'll talk about this phenomenon or trend that's quite unique to the Chinese market, which is called Tuangou, or translated directly to English as group buying. Since it will be a rather new concept to most listeners, first, let's just take a look at what exactly group buying is. So here we can provide some, user persona and scenarios. So a typical user of group buying app or previous form as WeChat group, the user is usually married, middle-aged female in tier 3 or tier 4 cities in China. Notice here, since China has just an enormous population, even by tier 3, tier 4 cities, we're talking about cities with more than 1 million people. So it's still quite highly urbanized compared to typical like small cities in other countries. So how does this group buying works? Well, in its earlier days, you would have a so-called community leader, which maintains a WeChat group for her, in most cases her or his local neighbors. So this is essentially like a WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger group where the community leader will post daily the product selection to this chat group. So it would say things like, we have some, fresh produce available today, such as, eggs, dairy, or vegetables. And in later days, we'll have like more like packaged goods, just not limited to fresh produce. And then the neighbors will select their own goods. Usually in earlier days, when it's just a group chat, they will just reply with a message saying, I want this certain of things, basically just type their grocery list in the chat. But later on, when they start to have their own independent, apps or could be apps within a WeChat, they will just have a more modern checkout system. And then after the community leader collects the information, he or she will place a bulk order to the group buying company, and they will deliver all this stuff pretty soon because what group buying basically solves is the efficiency of delivery, especially during the last mile, because now they just have to make one big delivery instead of maybe 50 or 100 smaller deliveries. So usually these goods will just be left by the door of this community leader inside the apartment building usually. And then the community leader, whether, he or she has a job or works at home, at the end of the workday, they will just come to pick up the bulk order and start dividing this stuff into smaller orders and try to fulfill the orders of the neighbors. So the business model is basically now those group buying companies or e-commerce companies who are making their group buying business, they now are basically outsourcing their last mile or last like 500 feet logistics to these community leaders, basically for the cost of 10% of whatever that order is. Since usually these orders have a reasonable profit margin, so even giving away 10% is a good deal for these group buying business companies. So this business model was already invented before the pandemic, but definitely the pandemic has accelerated the growth of the market. So if you look at some stats here, for example, in this article by Franklin Templeton. So by the way, I have all these links inside the Notion page, which I will post publicly on the show notes. So we're looking at about 70 RMB billion for the year of 2020. So that's when everyone was still locked down, and they are projecting about a 100% compound annual growth rate. So if they do the math correctly here on the chart, we're looking at maybe about a 2,000 RMB billion group buying market in China by the year of 2025. So that would be about $300. So people might ask, what's the reason that such business model works fairly well right now in China? Well, it's mostly due to the demographics and the population density in China. So if we just compare US and China here, we're seeing basically China has about the same area as US and then more than 4 times the population. So what that means is if we're looking at the metro and suburban areas in both countries, in the US, you probably have about let's see, like 1 million population on average per like metro area. While in China you have like almost 10 million people per city. So even it's only 4 times the total population in China due to its like bigger, tendency towards urbanized living. China in the urban area, the population density is actually about 10 times. So that definitely is a good situation for this group buy business model because you want to have community leaders to work with your group buying companies, and they need to have a large enough customer base to serve. So essentially, you want to have someone who's living closely with like hundreds of people just within a few apartment buildings. So kind of like, if one city could succeed in such model in the US, it's probably going to be like Manhattan, New York City. Another reason that it's so successful is because the higher growth rate in China compared to pretty much everything in the United States. So first of all, the GDP growth rate in China is still higher, so probably around like 60% right now compared to 2% in the United States. Since this is a highly developing business market, you definitely want to have high GDP growth rate. And secondly, the estimate grocery market size in China is also projected to surpass US. So right now, China has about 1.4 trillion compared to 1.5 trillion in US, and in the future, looks like it's going to be 1.8 for China versus 1.7 for US. So larger grocery market in China. And last one, if we look at the online e-commerce penetration rate, China is already twice the percentage as US, so 10% in China versus 4% in US. And looks like the projection is about 50% of China's grocery business or e-commerce or total commerce is going to be online. So half of that will be online. And for the US, looks like the peak of the projection is going to be about 22%. So all these things are combined. It just seems like the group buying business is going to definitely strive in the China's market, but it still remains a question for the US market. And I also included some other readings in the show notes, which I'll publish later. But basically, if you are interested in learning more, there's definitely this one company you should look into, which is called Pinduoduo, or PDD, as listed on the Nasdaq stock market. So they are one of the largest e-commerce company or just startup company for China in the last 10 years. Seems like they are now in the top 100 companies just by the total cap. Well, there are definitely a lot of risks related to this business model. Actually, China has already released some legislation notes on this business model. Well, first of all, since this is still emerging business, they are kind of like the earlier days for Uber or like all these food delivery business in US, which means the companies are heavily subsidizing these services. In Uber's case, it's not a bad thing because they are basically inventing a total new service, so no one really has expectation of how much you should pay for the ride. But in this case, since the group buying companies, they are directly competing with all the supermarkets or farmers markets in China, which have a relatively stable price. So since they've been heavily subsidizing their products, especially at earlier stage, essentially the China's government is very concerned about such behavior because they are slowly driving all the supermarkets and farmers out of business, since those established business, they couldn't really afford to subsidize because they're not taking any money from the investors for now, and they're just maintaining their current customer base, not really seeking to rapidly expand. So seems like the legal notes from the China's government has certainly slowed the competition between these group buying companies. So it'll be interesting to see what they are going to do next, since now they can't really use those extreme measures to grow their customer base. So that's all I prepared for today. If you want to hang out for a few minutes and ask some questions, you can use the caller queue feature. Otherwise, I hope you have a good night. I will be here for a few minutes to take any questions.